start with this. We now know who it is, Sky Nicholson, unbeaten Olympic amateur standout Sky Nicholson. We now know who it is she's going to be fighting on the undercard of Warrington versus Martinez 2 this weekend. She's going to be taking on seasoned journeywoman Beck Connolly. Beck Connolly, who's actually got 2 fights scheduled, 2 fights on the books. This weekend's fight against Sky Nicholson. Then next month, she's supposed to be taking on unbeaten Nina Hughes on the 15th as part of an MTK Global show.
Beck's coming off of 5 consecutive losses.
Beck's been in there with everybody. Natasha Jonas, Carly Skelly, Ramla Ali, Ebony Bridges, more recently, Maria Secchi, who's going to be in action very soon.
Going to be in action very soon against Mary Romero, who gave Amy Timlin her first professional loss.
That's going to be an interesting fight. Better still, Beck Connolly's been in there with everybody.
She's set to be in there with Sky Nicholson this weekend.
Who will attempt to advance to a professional record of 2 wins, no losses, no draws, no recorded knockouts, not yet. I think this will be an opportunity for Sky Nicholson to...
Yeah, I got no issues with the fight.
It's quite customary for a unbeaten up-and-comer, even a blue-chip prospect, an Olympic amateur standout like a Sky Nicholson, to take on somebody like a Beck Connolly in their first couple of fights in the early stages of their career. So I have no complaints, no protests, no criticisms.
The idea is to get Sky some pro experience.
And Beck Connolly, if nothing else, she is very experienced. In Sky Nicholson's pro debut, she took on an unbeaten up-and-comer like herself with 3 pro fights under her belt, whereas the goal with a Beck Connolly...
Pick on somebody with more rounds in the bank.
More rounds in the bank and more experience, pro experience, than a Jessica Juarez. Against Jessica Juarez, Sky Nicholson spent the fight on the fly, fighting on the balls of her feet, sticking and moving, boxing from the outside. Will we see a more front-foot heavy Sky Nicholson against Beck Connolly?
I'd like to see a little bit more aggression from Sky.
We've seen what she can do boxing from the outside. Let's see what she can do boxing on the inside, mid-range to inside, within close quarters, in the pocket against Beck Connolly.
Hey, we saw what Ebony Bridges did to Beck Connolly on the inside.
Landed a couple hard shots, stopped her in 3 rounds. 3rd round TKO stoppage. Let's see if Sky Nicholson can't rack up one of those.
It'd be Sky Nicholson's first recorded knockout as a professional.
If she does end up stopping Beck Connolly, and let's see if she doesn't. I do want to see a bit more aggression from Sky this time out, bit more work mid-range to inside. Let's see what kind of artillery she's packing. Task at hand for Sky Nicholson, now that she's a professional, is transitioning from amateur style to a pro style. Such is the task for many amateur standouts.
Transitioning from a point-based style to a style more geared towards inflicting damage.
Photo finish punches and picking punches that'll get you that knockout, get you that stoppage. As I stated in a previous video, I expect to see Sky Nicholson at least 3-4 times in action this year alone.
It's usually how it goes for unbeaten up-and-comers. They're pretty busy their first couple of years.
Keep your eyes peeled for Nicholson versus Connolly on the undercard of Warrington versus Martinez 2 this weekend. In men's lightweight news, I'm sure that most of you have heard by now. Lomachenko is staying in war-torn Ukraine. Kambosos to pursue unification fight with out-Haney. Paul DeBella told BoxingSync.com that he will now pursue a bout with Sydney's Kambosos and Las Vegas's out-Haney for June 5th at the Marvel Stadium, which would be streamed or televised the night of June 4th in the United States. I spoke to Aegis Climax and he confirmed that Loma would not be available to fight George next, DeBella said. He thanked me and thanked Kambosos for giving him ample opportunity to make up his mind, and he thanked us for doing the deal in the first place. We had an inkling the other day when the Ukrainian government has said it was okay for Lomachenko to fight, but we didn't hear an affirmative response from Lomachenko. We had a sense that this was likely, so we're not shocked.
Questioned it myself when I heard the news that Lomachenko and Usyk were given the green light to resume their careers.
Just because they're given the green light by the Ukrainian government doesn't necessarily mean that they would.
Not while Ukrainian cities are being bombed to the ground.
Aegis Climax confirmed today that he's going to stay in the Ukraine. We commend him. We think the fight he's fighting is much bigger than boxing, and our thoughts and prayers are with him and his family, and with the Ukrainian people. What they're going through, obviously, is far more significant than any boxing match. DeBella has reached out to DAZN executives to give that streaming service an opportunity to carry the Kambosos versus Haney fight in most countries worldwide June 5th. We've always said that we're fighting in a stadium in June, DeBella said. We're going to pursue the biggest opportunity that's available, the Haney fight. That's what we said from the beginning.
Now it's a question of Team Kambosos and Team Haney reaching agreeable terms.
Being honest, I didn't give George Kambosos much of a chance against Vasyl Lomachenko. I didn't, even in his own neck of the woods, even with home field advantage. I was confident that if that fight gets over the line and it actually takes place, Vasyl Lomachenko was going to take those Alphabet titles and the Ring Magazine belt from George Kambosos. For my money, the Vasyl-Lomachenko fight was a much more dangerous and less winnable fight than a out-Haney fight. Out-Haney is a skilled operator, a quality boxer, but what he's not is a concussive puncher.
No, he's not a big puncher.
Because he's not a big puncher, there's a chance that the fight between out-Haney and George Kambosos, there's a chance that it goes to the cards. If it goes to the cards, strange things can happen.
So it happened in Taylor versus Catterall, right?
Right. Home field advantage is a real thing, whether you like it or not. And if this fight takes place, if they manage to get it over the line, and in the fight, George Kambosos is the busier fighter, busier to the eye, in his own neck of the woods.
What do you think? Those judges are going to be doing out-Haney any favors?
If George Kambosos, throughout the course of that fight, is the busier fighter in the fight, putting punches together, backing out-Haney off, putting him on his back foot, if that's the way it works out, how do you think those judges are going to score those rounds? This is the peril associated with a out-Haney versus George Kambosos fight set to go down in Australia. This is the peril that out-Haney faces. Vasyl-Lomachenko was more capable of taking the fight out of the judges' hands than out-Haney. Thus, I viewed the Vasyl-Lomachenko fight as the more dangerous fight for George Kambosos. Against Devin, George has got a shot.
A better shot than whatever shot he had against Loma.
It's up to the two teams now to get this fight over the line, and let's see if they do. As far as the fight itself, I'm indifferent. I was okay with the Lomachenko fight, and I'm currently okay with a out-Haney fight. The question is, can they get it done? Can they reach agreeable terms? They reached agreeable terms with Vasyl-Lomachenko in what was a more dangerous fight for George than this fight is.
I don't think George Kambosos is at all scared of out-Haney.
Quite the opposite. He spent a good portion of his career abroad fighting in other fighters' neck of the woods. He very recently took on a bigger puncher than out-Haney in Teofimo Lopez, and we all saw what happened. And he signed on to face Vasyl-Lomachenko, but the war started, and now Vasyl-Lomachenko is preoccupied, essentially.
No, I don't think George Kambosos is at all afraid of out-Haney.
I don't. George Kambosos' track record, it speaks for itself.
I don't think George Kambosos is at all afraid of out-Haney.
I want you guys to understand something. The George Kambosos versus Vasyl-Lomachenko fight was all but done until the war started. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Whereas things are a little bit more tumultuous between Team Kambosos and Team Haney. Team Kambosos and Team Haney that traded barbs.
Of course.
George said, when the gate is closed, the little dog barks and is full of energy. But let's see when the gate is fully open if the little dog still has the same bark and energy. Tick-tock. To which out-Haney replied, my energy will forever be the same. You were forced into this situation. Let's not confuse the people.
It's not exactly true.
It's not. We have to address the facts as they are. Out-Haney has no leverage against George Kambosos by any stretch of the imagination. There's nothing out-Haney can do to impose himself or impose this fight on George Kambosos. So if they're negotiating, it has to be because George wants the fight. George Kambosos, who stated, oh, she's a long one, done it countless times across the Pacific, in reference to the travel time for an American-based fighter to travel to the land down under, Australia.
Flight time from Las Vegas to Melbourne is 19 hours and 35 minutes. Distance from Las Vegas to Melbourne is approximately 13,140 kilometers.
Which is why George Kambosos said, oh, she's a long one, done it countless times across the Pacific, to which out-Haney replied, I know how long the flight is, as long as my dick. Don't try to talk me out of it, bitch. I'm on my way. To which George Kambosos Jr. responded, you can have the biggest stick in the world, but without big balls, you're pretty damn useless. Oh, someone's angry. Woof, woof, woof. Tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. The clock is ticking for Team Kambosos and Team Haney to reach a deal. And what you'll immediately notice is that negotiations between Team Kambosos and Team Haney, they don't go over as smoothly. They don't seem to go over as smoothly as the negotiations for what was the Kambosos-Lomachenko fight. Behind the scenes,
This is why I tell you, you have to understand the fight was all but done.
the fight between George Kambosos and Vasyl-Lomachenko, that fight was pretty much a done deal, and if it wasn't for the war, that would be the next fight that George Kambosos Jr. would have been participating in, and it didn't involve any of the back-and-forth action we are now seeing, once again, from Team Kambosos and Team Haney. You get the sense that there's more of a mutual respect between Team Kambosos and Team Lomachenko, or maybe it's just that Team Lomachenko is easier to deal with because they're willing to acquiesce to being the B-side. They're willing to acquiesce to doing whatever they have to do.
I think it's obvious by now there's more of a mutual respect between Team Kambosos and Team Loma than Team Kambosos and Team Haney.
Think about what George Kambosos said. Vasil Lomachenko, I respect your decision, and I totally understand, and I pray for you and your country. Please stay safe, and once I wipe the floor with Devin, we will make this fight between two real champions. God bless.
He doesn't view Devin as a real champion.
He views him as a little dog barking behind a fence. But it wasn't always this way. It wasn't always this way between them. This back and forth rhetoric we've been seeing from Team Haney and Team Kambosos, that didn't really kick off until they entered into negotiations. You have to wonder what was said and what was demanded that led to the relationship.
No, there used to be more of a mutual respect between them.
And all of that stopped upon the first set of talks. The first set of negotiations that led Team Kambosos to doing a fight with Vasil Lomachenko instead, but we know what happened. The war started, and Vasil Lomachenko is now preoccupied with that, so they've returned their attention back to Devin Haney.
George says he views Devin Haney as a little dog barking behind a fence.
You have to wonder why that is. I vaguely recall Bill Haney saying that the narrative needs to change. The narrative that the fight has to happen in Australia. I haven't soon forgotten that Bill Haney, the father of Devin Haney, said that. You kind of got the sense that the Haneys weren't keen on traveling, perhaps? I mean, why would he say that?
If you've known this whole time that George Kambosos wants his next fight to be a hometown fight.
If you've known this whole time that what he wants is for his very next fight to take place in his neck of the woods, why are you sat there saying that the narrative needs to change, that the fight must happen in Australia, when you know who wants it to happen in Australia? Is that why George Kambosos is likening Devin Haney to a little dog barking behind a fence?
Is that what gave him that impression?
As stated, negotiations between Team Kambosos and Team Loma went over a lot more smoothly than what we are seeing now.
You have to wonder why that is.
I'll tell you what I think. I think Devin Haney needs this fight a lot more than George Kambosos does, because Devin Haney is
growing.
Young guy, body's still growing. He can't continue to make 135 pounds forever, and what waits for him at 140 pounds is a lot of high-risk, low-reward fights.
That's what's up there.
Jose Ramirez, Jose Pedraza, Jose Zapata, Regis Prograrius, Subriel Matias, Gary Antoine Russell,
Montana Love.
These guys aren't as talked about as a Vasil Lomachenko, a George Kambosos, a Teofimo Lopez, or a Devin Haney. But man, oh man, would they love to have a name like Devin Haney's on their professional track record, their resumes upon his ascent to that weight class when the time comes. So before Devin Haney leaves the lightweight division, and it's only a matter of time before he does, he needs to have a big fight.
Add to his marquee value.
Get himself some kind of A-side leverage, some A-side say-so before he ascends to the 140-pound division. And the only way he can do that is against George Kambosos, because Ryan Garcia ain't going to give him the time of day, and neither is Deontay Davis.
Be serious.
I told you. I fucking told you. Deontay Davis ain't interested in any legacy fights with any legacy fighters. He's not interested in George Kambosos or whatever belts he holds. He's likely not interested in whoever wins this match.
He's not.
If they manage to get it over the line. Better still.
Didn't I tell you he was going to end up fighting Rolly Romero?
Didn't I tell you that Rolly Romero is likely going to beat those charges? If and when he does, all they're going to do is reschedule the fight between him and Gervonta. And should Gervonta beat him, they'll likely schedule an Isaac Cruz rematch. I mean, why do you...
He's the co-main event to the main event. He's the co-main event to Spence versus you guys.
Why do you think that is? Who do you think they're fattening him up for? The people over there at the PBC and the TMT don't have all that many lightweights in that lightweight show, yet they got this guy a co-main event slot on the undercard of what's supposed to be a very big fight. Not even the winner of Butaev versus Stanionis is the co-main event.
The winner of Butaev versus Stanionis is supposed to be the winner of Spence versus Ugas' mandatory challenger.
But they've scheduled Isaac Cruz versus Yuriorkis Gamboa as the co-main event to that main event. It's for a reason. They want to get eyes on Isaac, so when they do that Gervonta Davis rematch, it's a bigger fight than it was the first time out. So believe me when I tell you, Gervonta Davis ain't an option for Devin Haney or George Kambosos Jr. He exists in a world parallel to the sport of boxing, though not a part of it. Devin Haney needs this fight because outside of this fight, he ain't got that many options, and what options are available to him at 140 pounds are all high-risk, low reward fights.
None that come with the prestige that this fight does.
The prestige of becoming this division's undisputed champion before so ascending to the super lightweight division. Eddie Hearn states that they've received an offer.
And that they're in negotiations, they're reviewing the offer.
To see if the terms are acceptable, and he believes, he being Eddie Hearn, he believes that they will be. out-Haney needs this fight. Before he leaves the lightweight division, he needs to do what he's got to do to get George in the ring and see if he can't beat that guy to become this division's undisputed champion and add some marquee value to his name.
He's got to make sacrifices to make them.
Because the day he leaves the lightweight division, there are two fundamental problems with his ascent to 140 pounds. One, which I just discussed, is that a lot of those fights, those are high-risk, low-reward fights. Very capable fighters. The talent pool is rich at 140 pounds, but the marquee value, not so much. There's that to consider. Then there is also that Matchroom, they don't have the run of the place at 140 pounds. For the most part, top rank. Think about it. Jose Ramirez, Jose Zapata, Jose Pedraza, Teofimo Lopez,
Arnold Barboza,
Josue Vargas, who's going to be in action this weekend. Where do you see all those guys fighting? What side of the street are they on?
Subriel Matias, Gary Antoine Russell, those two guys are on the PBC side of things.
Regis Prograis and Jack Catterall, those two boys, those are pro bellum fighters. And essentially what I'm getting at is, at 140 pounds, what you got is a lot of high-risk, low-reward fights. That's what you got. But even with those fights, there are still politics involved. There are still political boundary lines there that determine which fights are more feasible.
There are serious questions as to what fights with what fighters would out-Haney even have access to.
So before you end up moving to 140 pounds, all the problems that come with it, you want to take care of business at 135 pounds. Get yourself some kind of leverage. Maybe you go to Australia, see about beating George Kambosos Jr. If you do, you can use your status as that division's undisputed champion to not only move up in weight afterwards, yeah, you move up in weight, but you'll be able to move up in weight and immediately challenge for one of those alphabet titles. One of those alphabet titles at 140 pounds, regardless of what side of the street it's on.
If he becomes undisputed at 135, maybe the WBO gives him super status.
WBO super status that might put him in a position to challenge for the WBO title at 140 pounds, so long as he becomes the undisputed champion at 135, before moving up. We've seen it before.
Crawford Nusuk.
Devin's got to take care of business. He needs to win this fight.